The SUV was doing highway speed on the Wilbur Cross Parkway in Milford, Connecticut, when a mountain lion came out of the median. It was June 11th, 2011. He died on the shoulder, a young male, 140 pounds, in a state that hadn't had a wild cougar in it since the 1800s. Everybody assumed the same thing that first night. Somebody's illegal pet got loose. But a genetics lab in Montana was about to prove this animal had walked to Connecticut and that 4 states had already touched him without knowing who he was. And that assumption wasn't lazy. It had a paper trail from 11 days earlier and 40 miles down the coast. Starting on May 31st, people in Greenwich, Connecticut, had been reporting a big cat around the King Street campus of the Brunswick School. Not one person, a string of them, over about a week, including a Greenwich Emergency Medical Service crew, which is not a group you can easily wave off as 3 guys who saw a fat house cat at dusk. On June 5th, somebody finally got a photograph. It was blurry, the way these photographs always are, but it was a mountain lion, and Connecticut's environmental agency said so out loud. They also said what they believed about it, which is that a cat like that in Fairfield County had to be somebody's escaped or released pet. That's the reasonable call. Given what anyone knew in the first week of June 2011, that's what I would have said too. Wild cougars had been gone from Connecticut since the 1800s. The nearest breeding population was on the other side of the Mississippi River. Nobody had ever documented a cougar making that trip, and privately held big cats do get loose in this country. Escaped pet was not a dodge. It was the only explanation with any precedent behind it. 6 days later, the animal was dead on the Wilbur Cross Parkway, and the necropsy started dismantling that explanation piece by piece. Here's what they found on him. The claws were intact and worn the way claws wear on an animal that climbs rock and dirt, not concrete. His teeth were unbroken. There was no collar mark on his neck, no tattoo in his ear, no microchip under his skin, and none of the wear patterns that show up on a cat that has spent years pacing a cage floor. Connecticut's Department of Energy and Environmental Protection sent tissue out for isotope testing, which reads the chemical signature of everything an animal has eaten and drunk over the course of its life. A captive cougar eats farmed meat and drinks municipal water, and it shows. This cat's chemistry said wild deer and wild water. There was no captivity in him anywhere, which left a worse question. If nobody let him out of a cage, then he walked here, and a mountain lion cannot walk into Connecticut without crossing most of a continent first. The tissue went to the U.S. Forest Service Wildlife Genetics Laboratory in Missoula, Montana. That lab does one thing well. It holds reference DNA from cougar populations all over the western United States, and it holds the loose samples that state biologists have been mailing in for years. The scat scraped off a snowbank, the hair pulled off a barbed wire fence, the blood off a deer kill. Nobody could explain. Most of those samples sit in freezers forever. Nobody ever finds out who left them. Understanding what that lab can actually do is the whole case, so give me 30 seconds on it. There are 2 different questions you can ask a cougar's DNA, and they get answered by 2 different techniques. The first question is where this animal's family came from. Cougar populations that have been separated from each other for generations drift apart genetically, so a Black Hills cat carries a different genetic signature than a Florida cat or a Wyoming cat. Compare an unknown sample against reference populations, and you can say with real confidence which population it belongs to. That's the geography. The second question is harder and more useful. Is this specific animal the same specific animal as that one over there? For that, you read a set of repeating markers scattered through the genome, and the combination of values across enough of those markers is effectively a fingerprint. 2 cougars from the same valley, even 2 brothers, come out different. Match enough markers between 2 samples and you've identified one individual animal, the same body, twice. That is the technique that turns a scrap of hair off a bedding site into a data point on a map. So they ran the Connecticut cat against the freezer, and the freezer answered. The genetic structure of the animal on the Milford Parkway placed him inside the cougar population of the Black Hills of South Dakota. This was a Black Hills cat, born in the pine ridges and canyons of western South Dakota, into the closest thing to a real cougar breeding population anywhere east of the Rocky Mountains, and he had ended up dead on a commuter road outside New Haven. Worth knowing what the Black Hills are in this story. They're an island, an isolated block of forested mountain country sitting out in the middle of the northern Great Plains, big enough to hold a real cougar population and not one animal more, surrounded on all sides by open grassland, ranches, and interstate. Cougars recolonized that island on their own during the 20th century, and by the 2000s they had filled it. Filled means young males with nowhere to go. Every year, that island fires young males off in every direction across open prairie, and biologists in Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, and Illinois have been picking up the evidence for 2 decades. Then the lab kept going, and this is where the case stops being roadkill and starts being a reconstruction, because the Missoula freezer had him on file already, 5 separate times in 5 separate places, spread across 18 months and 4 states. Biologists had collected genetic material from an unknown cougar and filed it away without a name. The Connecticut carcass gave them the name, and once they had it, they could run it backward and watch a single animal reappear across the map like a set of footprints developing in a dark room. Run it backward with me, because the route is stranger than the distance. Go back to December of 2009, Minnesota. The Twin Cities suburbs, snow on the ground, and a cougar moving through developed country where cougars are not supposed to be. Somebody collected the sample. That's the first hit. That's the earliest confirmed moment this specific animal existed anywhere in the record. Everything before that point in his life is gone, and it always will be. By January of 2010, he was in Wisconsin. He crossed into St. Croix County on the Minnesota border just east of the Twin Cities, and that's where he picked up the only name he ever had. The Wisconsin biologists started calling him the St. Croix mountain lion after the county, because a cat that keeps generating evidence needs something to be called in the paperwork. By February, he was documented further north in Wisconsin, still moving. 3 separate Wisconsin sites eventually produced DNA that matched him. 3 more citizen-run trail cameras in Wisconsin photographed a big tawny cat with a long, heavy tail, and 1 more camera caught him up near the Michigan line. Stop and think about who was actually doing this work. Not a research team, not a satellite collar. Those trail cameras belong to deer hunters and property owners, the kind of cameras strapped to an oak on the back 40 to see what's coming to the bait pile. This cat was tracked across the upper Midwest by ordinary people checking SD cards, and by biologists willing to bag a pile of scat on the off chance it mattered later. In May of 2010, a camera near the Wisconsin border with Michigan's Upper Peninsula got him 1 more time. And then he vanished for 7 months. That gap is the strangest stretch of the whole route, because the straight line from Michigan to Connecticut runs the better part of 1,000 miles through Ohio and Pennsylvania, and he did not take it. Nothing turned up in Ohio and nothing turned up in Pennsylvania. No track, no photo, no scrap of hair. Look at that on a map and the reason gets obvious fast. Straight east out of Michigan puts you into the industrial corridor along the southern Great Lakes, Detroit and Toledo and Cleveland, and everything welded together between them, one of the most continuously developed strips of ground in North America. A cougar moving by night through river bottoms and woodlots does not thread that. Turn north instead, and you get the opposite country. Timber, water, and almost nobody. Cross into Ontario above Lake Huron, and you can walk east for weeks through forest, then drop south again through the Adirondacks and be in New York without ever crossing a city. He appears to have taken the long way because the long way was the only way that still worked. Wherever he actually went during those 7 months, he went where nobody had a camera on a tree and nobody was looking down at the mud. Then, on the 16th of December 2010, Cindy Eggleston looked out into her backyard in the town of Lake George, New York, in the southeastern Adirondacks, and saw a cougar standing in it. That call could have died right there. It is the exact kind of report that gets logged, filed, and quietly discounted because state agencies get hundreds of them a year, and almost all of them turn out to be bobcats or big house cats or a fisher seen wrong in bad light. What saved this one is who her husband was. David Eggleston is a retired colonel with New York's Department of Environmental Conservation. He knew what mattered. The next morning, he went out with an environmental conservation officer, and they followed the animal's tracks through the snow until they found the spot where it had bedded down, and they pulled hair out of the bed. That hair went in an envelope. 6 months later, it matched a dead cat on a Connecticut parkway. So the New York backyard sighting was real. The Adirondack tracks were real, and the state that had been telling people for a century that they were seeing things had, for one night in December, been exactly as wrong as those people always said. If you're the kind of person who wants the version with the dates and the county names and the actual lab work in it, this channel was built for you. Subscribe and you won't miss one. And tell me in the comments which county you're watching from and whether you've ever seen something you couldn't explain or a warden who went quiet when you brought it up. Now the numbers on this route, straight line Black Hills to Milford, is about 1,500 miles. But no animal walks a straight line across the United States, and the confirmed detections say he didn't. Reconstructing the ground he almost certainly covered, using the confirmed points and the terrain between them, the researchers put his actual route at more than 1,700 miles over roughly 2 years. From the Minnesota detection to the parkway is 18 months of documented movement. And the best reading of the gap is that he went north out of Michigan into Ontario, along the top of the Great Lakes, and then came back down into New York from Canada. That's the longest dispersal ever documented for a mountain lion, not the longest in the East. The longest anywhere by any cougar ever recorded. To feel how far outside normal that is, you need one comparison, and Kevin Hines gave the best one. He's a wildlife biologist with New York's Department of Environmental Conservation, and after the DNA came back, he laid the numbers out. A young male cougar leaving home out west usually settles 100 or 200 miles from where he was born. The standout case before this one was a radio-collared South Dakota male that made it to Oklahoma, about 660 miles. The Connecticut cougar went roughly 3 times that far. Hines said flatly that if you'd asked him beforehand, he wouldn't have thought it was possible. So why did he do it? The mechanism isn't mysterious, and it isn't wanderlust. Male cougars are obligate dispersers. A young male gets pushed out of his mother's range by the resident adult males who will kill him if he stays, and he leaves to find unoccupied country with females in it. In the West, he finds both within a couple hundred miles, and he stops. He settles, he breeds, he holds ground. This cat left the Black Hills and never found a female. That's the whole engine of the story. He crossed Minnesota looking, he crossed Wisconsin looking, he went around the Great Lakes looking, came down through the Adirondacks looking, and he was still looking when he stepped onto the Wilbur Cross Parkway. There was no female cougar anywhere on that route because there is no breeding population anywhere on that route. He wasn't migrating toward anything. He was failing to find something for 2 years and 1,700 miles, and the failure is what carried him to the Atlantic seaboard. Now here's the objection you should be raising, and it's the strongest one there is. If an animal that size crossed 4 states over 2 years, how did he stay invisible? A 140-pound cat walking through Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ontario, and New York should have been seen constantly. He was detected roughly 10 times in 18 months. That's it. 10 confirmed contacts, most of them scat and hair, spread across more ground than the distance from New York City to Denver. And that number is the most unsettling fact in this entire case, because it tells you what the detection rate actually is for a cougar moving through settled country. He walked past farms, he walked past subdivisions, he crossed interstates and rivers and probably a few backyards, and the record caught him 10 times. Every other night of those 2 years, he was somewhere, and no one knew. State agencies aren't hiding anything. They are working with a system that can only confirm what somebody physically collects, and almost nobody collects anything, because almost nobody believes what they saw well enough to go back out in the morning and look for hair. That Lake George sighting only got confirmed because the woman who made it happened to be married to a man who'd spent his career in the DEC and knew to go find the bed. How many of those beds has nobody ever gone looking for? That's the part worth sitting with. Not enough to confirm a population, not enough to dismiss the sightings. Which brings us to what this case actually proves, and this is where a lot of retellings go off the rails. It does not prove that cougars are back in the East. One animal is not a population. It proves that the corridor is passable, that a cougar can physically cross from South Dakota to the Atlantic coast under its own power in the 21st century, over highways and around cities, and arrive in Connecticut in good condition. The land will still carry him. That's real, and it's new information. But recolonization doesn't happen on the backs of wandering males. It happens when females move, and female cougars are the opposite of dispersers. A young female usually settles right next to her mother's range, sometimes overlapping it. She moves a few miles, not a few thousand. So cougar range only ever creeps outward from an existing breeding population in short increments, one generation at a time, and it takes decades to cover ground a single male can walk in a couple of years. Which means the honest version of the eastern cougar question comes down to arithmetic. Females would have to establish breeding range across the Dakotas, then Minnesota, then Wisconsin, then Michigan, then Ontario, in that order, each step taking a generation or more before a breeding population could ever appear in New England. Nothing about the Connecticut cat shortcuts that. All he demonstrates is that a male can survive the crossing, and the fact that he died out there alone with no mate anywhere behind him along that entire route is the clearest evidence we have that nothing followed him. There's one more thing about this case that almost never gets mentioned, and it's the reason any of it exists as science at all. Every single detection along that route was reactive. Nobody was tracking him. There was no collar, no study, no funded survey watching this animal cross the country. 5 DNA samples, 4 trail camera photographs, 1 dead body on a parkway, and a genetics lab in Missoula that happened to hold all of it in the same freezer. The entire 18-month journey was assembled after the fact, out of material collected by people who had no idea what they had. In 2016, it went into the Journal of Mammalogy under the title Long-Distance Dispersal of a Subadult Male Cougar from South Dakota to Connecticut, documented with DNA evidence, which is about as plainly as science ever states something extraordinary. He was somewhere between 2 and 5 years old when he died. He was a few miles from the salt water of Long Island Sound. He'd crossed the Mississippi River, the Great Lakes, an international border, and every interstate in between, and the thing that finally stopped him was a car on a commuter parkway in Fairfield County at highway speed. And he was still looking. That's the part I keep coming back to. 2 years of walking, 1,700 miles of country, and the animal died on the shoulder of the Wilbur Cross Parkway in Milford, Connecticut, still searching for a female of his own species in a half of the continent that hasn't held one in over 100 years. Somewhere in the Black Hills right now, another young male is being run off by an adult, and he's pointing himself east. The record says most of them stop within 200 miles. The record also says one of them didn't. Tell me which county you're in and what you've seen. The people who live on this land have been ahead of the labs on this for a long time.